The Pulley Poem by George Herbert. A poem analysis and explanation line by line with literary devices. Presented by Ms. R. Anurada, Assistant Professor of English, Department of English, PSGR Krishnamal College for Women, Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu, India. Read a poem. The Pulley by George Herbert. When God at first made man, having a glass of blessings standing by, let us, said he, pour on him all we can. Let the world's riches, which dispersed lie, contract into a span. So strength first made a way. Then beauty flowed, then wisdom, honor, pleasure. When almost all was out, God made a stay. Perceiving that, alone of all his treasure, rest in the bottom lay. For if I should, said he, bestow this jewel also on my creature, he would adore my gifts instead of me, and rest in nature, not the God of nature. So both should losers be. Yet let him keep the rest, but keep them with repining restlessness. Let him be rich and weary, that at least, if goodness lead him not, yet weariness may toss him to my breast.
Author's note: George Herbert was born in 1593, died in 1633. He was a Welsh-born poet, orator, and priest of the Church of England, known for his devotional poetry, which was published posthumously in the collection The Temple. Educated at Cambridge, he initially pursued a career in public service, attracting the attention of King James I, but later committed himself to the church. He was ordained in 1630 and served as the rector of Bemerton, a small country parish, where he died of tuberculosis shortly before his 40th birthday.
The Pulley. The poem. Introduction. The Pulley is English metaphysical poem written by George Herbert. In this poem he highlights a reflection on humanity's restlessness and God's loving wisdom. In this tender, witty poem, a speaker imagines God creating humankind and giving people every possible blessing but one, rest. The longing for a kind of peace one can't find on earth, the poem suggests, is just another part of God's plan to draw humanity back into a divine embrace. This poem first appeared in the posthumous collection The Temple in the year 1633. When God created humanity, he happened to have a cup of blessings to hand, and said to himself, why don't I give humanity every gift I can think of? I'll gather up all the world's far-flung wealth and shrink it down into one little human lifetime. First, he gave humanity strength, which made a path for the rest of the virtues. Then he poured out beauty, then wisdom, noble morality, and delight. But when he'd almost finished emptying the blessings cup, God held back, seeing that only peace was left in the bottom. He said, if I also gave this last precious gift to my creation, people would love the things I gave them and forget all about me. They'd be so peacefully contented with their lives on earth that they wouldn't think to love the God who created all this goodness. Both humanity and I would lose out on something if that happened. So let's do things this way: humanity can keep all the other gifts I've given them, but they'll also feel a constant, regretful, distracting longing. Humanity shall be greatly blessed, but also tired out by life's travails, and by a nagging desire to come home to me. That way, if pure moral goodness doesn't draw them back to me, then exhaustion will. Poem theme. Being a person, the Pulley suggests, means being rich in blessings but also full of repining restlessness, that is, a sorrowful, fidgety, distracted longing for a kind of peace and satisfaction that one simply can't find on earth. The poem suggests that God gave people all sorts of precious gifts when creating human beings, but held back the final blessing of rest. That lack of rest means that earthly life is marked by an unquenchable dissatisfaction and longing. But this, the speaker argues, is all part of God's benevolent plan. The weariness of such longings will eventually draw people back to rest in God's embrace. God bestows all kinds of wonderful gifts on man, the speaker observes, from strength to beauty to pleasure, pouring out a bountiful glass of blessings on the work in progress that is humankind. God seems abundantly generous. But God also reserves one final blessing, rest or peace. Line-by-line explanation of the poem. When God at first made man, having a glass of blessing standing by. Let us, said he, pour on him all we can. Let the world's riches, which dispersed lie, contract into a span. In these opening lines of the poem, the poet presents an imaginative depiction of God as the creator of mankind. God is portrayed as having a glass of blessings prepared for humans, symbolizing a container filled with various gifts and blessings that he intends to bestow upon them. God, in his benevolence, decides to pour all these blessings upon humanity. He expresses his desire to concentrate all the scattered riches and abundance of the world into a limited measure, represented by the phrase, contract into a span. This signifies that God wants to give humans a condensed and concentrated form of his blessings, filling them with abundant gifts. The lines convey the idea that God, at the very beginning of human creation, intended to bless mankind with an abundance of his divine gifts and favor. The image of the glass of blessings and the pouring of these blessings onto humanity emphasize God's generosity and his desire to bestow all that is good upon his creation. It sets the stage for the rest of the poem, which delves into the concept of withheld rest as a means to draw humans closer to God. The first stanza of the Pulley depicts God as a generous, inspired tinkerer improvising the creation of humankind. When God at first made man, the speaker tells readers, God just so happened to have a glass of blessing standing by to pour out on this creation. It sounds rather as if God made a cup of tea, forgot about it, and then rediscovered it. What a stroke of luck. This gently funny moment establishes the poem's attitude toward God. This is a God whose blessings are so abundant that the greatest of them can be poured out without a second thought. Glasses of blessings might be cooling on bookshelves and countertops all over God's studio. The poem even lets readers listen in on God's thought process in the moment of creation. Listen to the anaphora here. Let us, said he, pour on him all we can. Let the world's riches, which dispersed lie, contract into a span. That echoing let might feel familiar to readers who are familiar with the biblical creation story in Genesis, in which God declares, "Let there be light," to bring light into the world. This subtle allusion marries biblical grandeur to the touching image of God as a hobbyist talking to himself over his workbench. But the project God proposes is a spectacular one. In planning to collect all the world's dispersed, or far-flung, riches and shrink them down into a span, God is preparing to condense every. But the project God proposes is a spectacular one. In planning to collect all the world's dispersed, or far-flung, riches and shrink them down into a span, God is preparing to condense every possible blessing into the short span of one human life, a miracle of generosity. This poem's God clearly delights in humanity. Here at the outset of the poem, take a moment to look at the way the stanzas use meter. Each 5-line stanza, or quinton, starts with a short line of iambic trimeter, that is, a line of 3 iambs, metrical feet with a ddum rhythm. When God, at first, made man. Lines could be divided as such when God. Next iambic as at first. And the next phrase as such made man. Yet, it expands to 3 lines of iambic pentameter, 5 iambs in a row, then, it closes on another line of trimeter. In other words, there's a short-long-short pattern happening here. Each stanza is rhymed as follows ABABA, for instance, in the first stanza, man and by and can and lie and span. The stanza's rhymes thus always end back on an A rhyme, returning to where they began. In both its meter and its rhymes, then, this poem makes a there and back again journey. These patterns will turn out to reflect the poem's philosophy. Perhaps it would not be too big a hint to observe that the poem's title is the pulley, and so far, there are no simple machines in sight. The metaphor of a pulley will become the poem's central conceit. This poem will ask what it is that draws people back to their origins in God. Explanation: these lines describe the moment God created humans. Imagine God has a giant glass overflowing with amazing things, like strength, beauty, wisdom, and all the good stuff in the world. God decides to give humans all these wonderful things. He tells angels to pour on him all we can. God wants to take all the good scattered around the world and give it to humanity.
These lines, such as, "So strength first made a way," then beauty flowed, then wisdom, honor, pleasure. When almost all was out, God made a stay, perceiving that alone of all his treasures rest in the bottom lay explanation. When God is filling the glass with all the wonderful things he wants to give humanity, he starts with essential qualities like strength, which helps humans to build and survive. Then, he adds beauty to appreciate the world, wisdom to make good choices, honor to live with integrity, and pleasure to enjoy life. Just as the glass is almost full, God pauses. He realizes there's one more important gift, but it is different. This gift is called rest, a sense of complete peace and satisfaction. He decides to hold on to rest for a bit. In these lines, the poet continues the imagery of God bestowing blessings upon humanity. He describes the sequential order in which these blessings were given. First, strength is mentioned as the initial blessing that God granted to humanity. This strength refers to physical and perhaps spiritual power, providing humans with the ability to endure and overcome challenges. Next, beauty is depicted as flowing to humans after strength. This could be interpreted as the aesthetic beauty that exists in nature, as well as the beauty found in human character and virtues. Following beauty, wisdom, honor, pleasure are mentioned. God grants humans wisdom to understand the world and make informed decisions, honor to uphold moral values and dignity, and pleasure to enjoy the delights and joys of life. However, when it seemed that almost all of God's blessings had been bestowed upon humans, the poem takes a turn. God made a stay, indicating that he paused or withheld something significant. The reason for this pause is explained in the next line. God perceived that rest was the only treasure he had not yet given to humanity. Here, rest has a deeper meaning beyond physical rest or relaxation. It signifies spiritual rest and contentment, the ultimate peace and fulfillment that can only be found in a close and harmonious relationship with God. The poem suggests that God intentionally withheld this rest from humans, realizing that if they were granted everything without experiencing the need for him, they might become too self-reliant and forget their dependence on him. By leaving rest in the bottom, God creates a void or a longing within humans that can only be filled when they turn to him in surrender and seek spiritual rest in his presence. This withholding of rest serves as a reminder that true satisfaction and completeness can only be found in a loving and faithful relationship with God. For if I should, said he, bestow this jewel also on my creature, he would adore my gifts instead of me, and rest in nature, not the God of nature. So both should losers be. Explanation. The God worries that if humans get everything, including perfect peace, they might only love and appreciate the gifts instead of loving God who gave them those gifts. They might get so focused on enjoying life on earth that they forget about God who created it all. In this scenario, both God and humans would lose. God wouldn't receive the love and appreciation he deserves, and humans wouldn't experience the deeper connection with their Creator. So God decides to hold on to rest for now, but keep them with repining restlessness. Let him be rich and weary, that at last, if goodness lead him not, yet weariness may toss him to my breast. Explanation. God gives humanity all the other gifts but not rest. This way, humans will never be completely satisfied. They'll always have a little feeling of wanting more. This feeling of restlessness might make them keep searching for something deeper, something that truly fulfills them. In the end, God hopes that either their good choices, or even the tiring struggles of life itself, will make them realize that true happiness comes from the God himself, and humanity eventually turns back to him God. Rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme of the Pulley by George Herbert is a BABA for the first 3 stanzas, and then changes to a BCBA in the final stanza. Stanza 1. When God at first made man, A, having a glass of blessings standing by, B, let us, said he, pour on him all we can. A, let the world's riches which dispersed lie, B, contract into a span. A, stanza 4, yet let him keep the rest. A, but keep them with repining restlessness. B, let him be rich and weary, that at last, C, if goodness lead him not, yet weariness, B, may toss him to my breast. A. Figure of speech found in the poem as follows. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words, repining restlessness. Repetition of R for emphasis. Metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two things without using like, or as it suggests, that one thing actually is another, creating a deeper meaning or image. Repetition. Repeating words or phrases over and over again for emphasis. For example, here, the word nature is repeated. And rest in nature, not the God of nature. Inversion. Inversion is a figure of speech where the normal grammatical order of a sentence is rearranged for emphasis or stylistic effect. So both should losers be. The words have been arranged in an inverse manner to add a poetic effect. Correct order. So both should be losers. Imagery. Imagery is a poetic device which creates a vivid picture in the minds of the readers. The glass of blessings. This image helps us visualize God having a tangible storehouse of good things. Paradox. A statement that seems contradictory on the surface but may contain a deeper truth. For example, Rich and Weary. Appreciation of the poem, The Pulley. The Pulley, by George Herbert, is a secular poem having hints of religious elements woven into it. The title of the poem is quite justified because just as a pulley lifts up objects to a greater height, God, the Creator too, lifts man towards him through the pulley of restlessness. The rhyme scheme used in the first three stanzas of the poem is a B-A-B-A, while that of the fourth stanza is a B-C-B-A. The poem is beautified using figures of speech such as alliteration, antithesis, climax, consonance, hyperbole, inversion, metaphor, paradox, personification, repetition, synecdoche, and tautology. An example of metaphor from the poem is, bestow this jewel also on my creature, where the gift of rest is indirectly compared to something precious such as a jewel. The theme of the poem revolves around the fact that human beings are bestowed with many gifts by God. Yet we tend to be materialistic and overlook God, who always pulls us towards him. Written from the point of view of God, this poem gives us a clear idea that as humans, we are subject to God's will, and all the wealth in the world wouldn't be able to compensate for the satisfaction and solace we seek in him. Myth and conceit in The Pulley. Many critics consider the poem, The Pulley, containing a myth of origins, yet many others suggest that it is a moral and spiritual fable. However, both these genres overlap because of the way the poem is presented. According to Herbert, someone's devotional responsibility is perfectly consistent with the flow that decides his personality. The poem is short and yet simple, but Herbert manages to reaffirm several key facts. The approach to creation myth emphasizes the dignity of humankind. This dignity is bestowed by God, who is always considered to be thoughtful, generous, apart from being kind. In the book of Genesis, the story of creation that we come across says that a spiritual breath raised dusty clay to life, and this living being was Adam. Nevertheless, in Herbert's poem, the creation appears to be even more wonderful because humanity, as well as humankind, is projected as the summation of all the riches that the world possesses. Moreover, God is a being that can easily and cordially communicate with all his creations, living and non-living. Along with this emphasis on the dignity of humankind, there is, however, a carefully drawn difference. Beauty, strength, wisdom, honor along with pleasure are all integral and vital aspects of humankind. Yet, these are not sufficient to guarantee the spiritual health of the people. Only for this purpose, human beings need rest, and this is one quality that God has held back. Thus, the independence of human beings is definitely curtailed. The pulley never ever suggests that humankind is miserably flawed or impotent, or life that we come across in the world of nature is insignificant or useless. Herbert opines that life can, definitely, be rich. Nevertheless, the poem highlights the limitations of human beings and the liabilities that one comes across while undergoing this earthly existence. The Pulley is one of those rare poems which are replete with meaning. God is presented as a being who knows everything and has clear knowledge about how eventually life will turn out to be.
For if I should, said he, bestow this jewel also on my creature, he would adore my gifts instead of me, and rest in nature, not the God of nature. So both should losers be. Here, we see that God is tense that man might prefer to rest in nature while ignoring him completely. God was definitely aware that his treasures would eventually tire man and exhaust him. He desired that man should find true rest only in him. God wanted all of us to rest in him, for he is the only one who is able to give the best while the rest appear desperately seeking comfort. Especially if we consider for 17th century religious poems that were composed by Herbert and his contemporaries. Though the most distinctive feature of this metaphysical poem is the religious tone, it conveys through a secular as well scientific image that not just requires the reader's friendliness with the subject matter, but also expects certain knowledge of some basic laws of physical sciences.
Thank you so much for patient listening to this audiobook, and stay tuned till I meet in with another audiobook. Bye bye, take care, have a great day ahead, and see you guys.